Okay, good evening. We are, now I know what my teachers were complaining about all year long when they had students in front of them and they had students on the side of them and they had students behind them. And they told me it was hard to do. Okay, good to be together with everybody. And the parsha this week is Pinchas, and what we're going to look at together is in chapter 27. And if you look at the handout, I did put in art scroll page numbers. We're going to look at page 889. Now, I think what's best for us to do is to read through these sentences first, and if everyone would just listen to them carefully, and if you have any questions, if we could start with people's questions, I think that would be the best of all. So we're going to start right at the top of page 889, sentence 12, and we're going to read it all the way through to 891, the next page, through the end of sentence 23. And without further ado, I'm going to call upon my faithful reader, Selwyn, here. Get the King's English here. Can you see yourself in the picture there?
Yeah, thank you very much. Hi, everyone.
Okay.
Hashem said to Moses, go up to this mountain of Abarim and see the land that I have given to the children of Israel. You shall see it, and you shall be gathered unto your people. You too, as Aaron your brother was gathered in, because you rebelled against my word in the wilderness of Zin, in the assembly's strife, to sanctify me at the water before their eyes. They were the waters of strife at Kadesh in the wilderness of Zin. Moses spoke to Hashem, saying, may Hashem, God of the spirits of all flesh, appoint a man over the assembly, who shall go out before them and come in before them, who shall take them out and bring them in. And let the assembly of Hashem not be like sheep that have no shepherd. Hashem said to Moses, take to yourself Joshua, son of Nun, a man in whom there is spirit, and lean your hand upon him. You shall stand him before Eleazar the Cohen and before the entire assembly, and command him before their eyes. You shall place some of your majesty upon him, so that the entire assembly of the children of Israel will pay heed. Before Eleazar the Cohen shall he stand. Who shall inquire for him of the judgment of the Urim before Hashem? At his word shall they go out, and at his word shall they come in, he and all the children of Israel with him, and the entire assembly. Moses did as Hashem had commanded him. He took Joshua and stood him before Eleazar the Cohen and before the entire assembly. He leaned his hand upon him and commanded him, as Hashem has spoken through Moses.
Okay. Anything striking that anybody would like to address up front? This is Succession. The title of this class is Succession of Leadership, and a whole bunch of elements pop out from this text. But what did anything particular pop out for you? Feel free to unmute yourself if you're at home, or if you're here, just speak up.
Right. The thing that jumps to my mind is the concept of, is he sharing power or is he sharing influence?
Power or influence?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, okay. So to answer, I mean, in other words, what?
See, in other words, is that if he's sharing power, he's giving up some of his power.
Well, first of all, this is prospective. This doesn't actually take place until the very last day of Moshe's life.
Right.
So even though, I mean, the first concern I have is the way it fits into the text. Because right before this, we're talking about a matter that came up involving the daughters of Tzlov and inheritance. Moshe deals with that. And then seemingly in sentence 12, God comes out of the blue and says, okay, go up, climb up to this mountain. You're going to see the land and you're finished. You know, it's like student of mine was once describing to me how he lost his job in a high-tech company. And he said at about 2:45 in the afternoon, these two guys in uniform walked into his office and they said, please stand up and don't touch anything. And one of them sat down and turned off his computer in front of them. And they handed him a small box and they said, what would you like to take with you? Because we're escorting you out of the building right now. In any event, he found himself on the corner with a small box and with no way to get home because his wife would typically meet him after her job and they would go home together. And that's the way he was dismissed from his company. So, and I'm sure from the company's viewpoint, they had several instances where they told someone that they were being dismissed and they had millions of dollars of damage occur afterwards because they mucked in with the system. In any event, it almost conjures that up to me when you look at sentence 12. Hashem said to Moshe, go up to the mountain, take a look at the land, but you're not going any further. You rebelled against me, period, out of the blue. So there's a harshness in tone to this section of the Torah. The next thing that occurs to me, there's something very ceremonious about the way this works out. I mean, there's three sections here. There's Hashem approaching Moshe in sentence 12. There's Moshe on his own discussing successor with God starting in sentence 15. And then there is God in 18 through the end proposing this elaborate ceremony. You're going to stand Joshua up in front of the people and you're going to call upon Elazar, the new Kohen Gadol, who has already succeeded your brother Aaron. And in front of Elazar, the Kohen, you're going to command Yoshua, no mention as to what that command is all about. And then he will become your successor. And Moshe does this. Now, this recording here again, not unusual for the Torah. It doesn't take place right now and abruptly here. The Torah is going to record at the very end of the Torah that all this happens and that Yoshua on the very last day of Moshe's life, really in the last moments of Moshe's life, takes over the leadership of the Jewish people. So that's what we have to look at. So the first thing I would like to do is look at source number 2 here. We're not going to go in exact order with the sheet, but we almost never do, I'm sorry. If you look at source number 2, which is Devarim 23:27, which is on Art Scroll page 959. And this is jumping ahead to the next book of the Torah, to the book of Deuteronomy, looking at the second Parsha. And if you look there, it begins as follows. It begins on page 958, 959 in the Art Scroll. Is everybody able to hear okay? Okay. So here Moshe, in the middle of a long dialogue with the Jewish people, says, I implored Hashem at that time, saying, my Lord Hashem Elohim, you have begun to show your servant your greatness and your strong hand for what power there is in the heaven and the earth that can perform according to your deeds. Let me now cross and see the good land. So Moshe here is giving us a perspective that he was, and I'll use the word here with all due respect, incessantly pleading before God that the decree against him be rescinded. And he even says, Hashem became angry with me because of you, and he did not listen to me. Okay, we're not going to go into that. We can look at that a few weeks from now when we get to this Parsha of the Torah. But what we see here is that what seems like out of the blue, the two guys in the uniform showing up at Moshe's desk with the little box, is in fact, in other words, Moshe, this whole final stage of his life, and we're really talking about the last, and I can't pinpoint it, when we get to the book of Deuteronomy, it's the last 37 days of Moshe's life. So here we're talking the last 40 days, 45 days of Moshe's life, where really the hourglass is running dry. So Moshe, when you put the pieces together in the Torah, Moshe takes the time later to say, I was in God's face praying and doing, I mean, if you want to be sarcastic here, which we don't want to do, you could accuse Moshe of clinging to leadership when his time had passed. You know, something that I've heard that people who run institutions for a long time are sometimes accused of doing. um, so we have to really give this a little context here and understand what's going on. So we're going to, in the course of tonight, when we look at these sources, we're going to think a little bit about what Moshe's motivation is. And is Moshe a ruler and a leader? And, you know, someone asked a question about influence or leadership. I mean, I think this idea that the Jewish people shouldn't be like sheep without a shepherd, which is the analogy that Moshe uses, indicates the fact that Moshe is in charge. Now, how much of it is power? How much of it is influence? You know, you don't think of the shepherd as beating all the sheep all the time to get them to cooperate, but by the same token, the shepherd has a staff. Also, it's noteworthy, and we should all think of this right away, that we always refer to God as the shepherd of the Jewish people. So in a way, there's something remarkable about Moshe saying to God, appoint a successor, otherwise they're going to be like sheep without a shepherd. You know, in a way, you could see God maybe turning to one of the angels and saying, am I chopped liver all of a sudden? You know, like who is Moshe kidding here in terms of, you know, does he really think he's irreplaceable? Now, I'm just raising all these issues because they really are threads in the text here that we have to think about and we have to consider. And we have to consider them in light of what the details are of what's spoken about and what's said here. But the first response I would say to Selwyn is that a shepherd carries a staff, and that staff is sometimes used to whack a sheep that's not cooperating. It's most of the time used to point the way or to gather sheep together and to say, okay, it's time for us to move on to the next hill. You know, the grass is greener there. It'll be healthier for the flock. It's time for us to move to a different place because it's not safe here any longer. You know, but it is leadership that we're talking about here. So just to blunt that notion about Moshe raising the specter of the shepherd, what do you see in what Hashem says here in the ceremony? I think this is a really interesting connection that redirects a little bit of the implications of Moshe talking about, shall the sheep be without a shepherd? Because let's look at sentence 21. Because remember, I talked about the fact that Hashem institutes a ceremony here. So he lines up, and this doesn't happen right now, but this is prospectively. He lines up Moshe in front of the people with Yoshua standing in front of him and Elazar the Kohen, who is the successor to Aaron. That itself is very poignant here because Aaron has already been replaced as the Kohen Gadol, something that probably wasn't imaginable to the Jewish people early on when he was appointed Kohen Gadol. But God points out, you'll do this before Elazar the Kohen shall he stand, who shall inquire for him of the judgment of the Urim before Hashem. At his word shall he go out, and at his word shall he come in. So look at a very interesting thought here. Elazar is standing there dressed as the Kohen Gadol, wearing the Urim V'Tumim. The Urim V'Tumim is the manner in which God directs the Jewish people. Should they go to war? Should they not go to war? Decisions that couldn't be made otherwise. Issues like Reuven and Gad wanting to stay on the other side of the Jordan River. It's the manner in which the leader consults God for direction. See, so it reasserts the hierarchy that we understand, and of course Moshe understood it. I'm not accusing Moshe of stepping out of bounds here, but this process clearly for the Jewish people reasserts very, very strongly the notion that the people being without a shepherd, yes, they need a leader, much important leader, a leader that they can see and hear. They need that. However, ultimately, that leader receives direction or has access to God, certainly at this stage of Jewish people's history. And therefore Hashem is the shepherd, as King David always describes him. But the leader is the authority person in charge. And without this chain of command, the Jewish people become scattered like sheep on the side of the mountain. Or, as we look ahead in the prophets, we'll see when the people come to Shmuel, to Samuel the prophet, and say, time we need a king. Those are the kind of discussions that we have. Well, do we need a king? Wasn't the prophet good enough? Moshe was never anointed as the king, but in many, many, many aspects, Moshe far supersedes the role of the king in the Jewish people. And this is totally parenthetical to tonight's class, but you could even argue that even when there were kings like David, the prophet superseded him, because after all, the prophet could come to David and basically accuse him of, usurping someone's wife, and the prophet walked out alive. You see, so this is not the purpose of tonight's class. But I think when you look at the back and forth, and that's what I want to try to get us into, there's a back and forth and a flow within these sentences of the Torah in chapter 27, sentences 12 through 23 on page 889 to 891 in the Art Scroll, that we need to get into and get involved in and understand. And then we're going to see if it doesn't line up in terms of its ideas and in terms of what we could really take to heart ourselves, in terms of A, being proper leaders when we are in the position of leadership, B, being proper followers when we're in the position of being under someone else's leadership. And what I would even say, there's a C here, and that is the role of the future leader vis-a-vis the current leader, the leader in waiting, the successor, and what we're going to see about that as well. Okay, so do you hear how this is, we're working our way through this text in a pretty orderly fashion here? So let's just we're going to go through it again and we're going to look at some of these sources here. It starts off in what seems like an ordinary context, but we now know from the book of Devarim that the context is Moshe basically pleading with God that his leadership continue, at least crossing the Jordan River and bringing them to the land of Israel, which we can check and remember was given to Moshe as Moshe's responsibility at the burning bush.
I do have a question, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Was Moses pleading to maintain his leadership, or was he just pleading to set foot in Israel?
Okay, so a good question. I don't know if everyone could hear it. What was Moshe pleading for? To remain the leader or to set foot in the land of Israel? And there's an interesting medrash which says he was pleading to remain the leader, but if not, at least let me become a follower, a member of the community, and cross over into the land. Okay, so that comment, and I don't know the exact source in front of me right now, but that would dispel the notion of Moshe being guilty of being arrogant or usurping power. Because after all, Moshe seems to be saying that we've embarked on a journey, and I would like to be part of the conclusion of this chapter of the journey. And that's where God answers him and says, no. You're going to be gathered into your people as Aaron, your brother, was gathered in. So again, God directly refers back to the notion that you've seen succession take place already. You have Aaron's son Elazar as the Kohen Gadol now, and Aaron is gone. And again, the breach was because of rebelling against God in hitting the rock and not speaking to the rock, which we discussed recently. And just to attach a thought to the last class we had, The notion being that at this point, and this touches a little bit on what Sullivan said, at this point, the leadership of the Jewish people has to be aimed at them having internalized the mission of the Jewish people, and yet they still need a leader to keep them on track. Whereas Moshe's segment of leadership had more to do with training the people so that they could internalize the values of the Torah and then be able to spread out into the land and live there under God's protection and in keeping of the Torah. So that's the transition we're looking at. And that's what God's referring to here. So this is our analysis of sentences 12, 13, and 14. So this is what God is asserting. Moshe, 100% to his credit, speaks up to God in sentence 15 and makes a request, may Hashem, God of the spirits of all flesh, appoint a man over the assembly who shall go out before them and come in before them, who shall take them out and bring them in. Let the assembly of Hashem not be like sheep that have no shepherd. Okay, most noteworthy of all is in sentence 16. This is something which, if you look at Rabbi Sachs's sheet on this week's Torah reading, he deals with it. But that's the source number, under source number 1 here. What does Rashi say? Appoint over them a leader who will bear with each person according to their individual character. That's Moshe's request. And that's in the words, contained in the words, may Hashem, God of the spirits of all flesh, appoint a man over the assembly. Now, Rabbi Sachs seems to make the point that it means a person who will not overlook the neediest members of the society or the weakest members of the society. And that's a great point, but I don't think that's really the point that Rashi's making here. The point that Rashi's making is that a leader has to recognize the divergence and the lack of similarity amongst the people. And what this evokes for me, and as I wrote in the source sheet here, it is understanding each person, which enables the leader to lead. And okay, here's what I want to say about that. We're used to leaders, in my opinion here, who take shortcuts to leadership. Now, if I can get all of us to hate the Jews and see them as the cause of all of our problems, then I can become the leader of Germany in the 1930s, and I can wield immense power over the country. And that's what Hitler was able to do. Now, is that based on this idea, a leader who will bear with each person according to their individual character? That's what I wanted us to think about for a moment here. The answer is no. It's not an appeal to the base instincts of the people that amalgamate people together and make us all seem like the same animal drinking the same Kool-Aid. So nerds, there's something to me very uplifting about the phrase that Moshe uses. Moshe is saying to God, we need a successor. First and foremost, in my way of thinking, as a successor, and here we'll borrow a phrase from President Lincoln, who speaks to the better angels of each person, which are individual strengths of character, and who could lead based on that type of an appeal. And I think that that's a beautiful, beautiful idea that Rashi is highlighting and that the rabbis are highlighting here. Not a leader who, in a moment of panic, when he feels his authority is being challenged, will revert to some low blow or low, appeal to some under instinct of people, but rather someone who will bring out the best in each person. And I think that's what he's talking about. And just to follow through, if you take this approach to Rashi, the idea of going out before them, coming in before them, because people will be inspired by the person, he shall take them out and bring them in, and let the assembly of Hashem not be like sheep that have no shepherd. In other words, they'll be individual beings, but they'll be able to reach toward a shared purpose and a shared goal that they could all aspire to. And this, as I've said a few times in this series on Bamidbar, the whole book of Bamidbar is based on this notion, which is that it's the Jewish people trying on the clothing of majesty of being a mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh, of being a holy nation. So holy nation doesn't stand in unison and salute the leader. A holy nation is pursuing a lofty purpose and goal in the world and in history, and realizes that we can best fulfill this purpose when we have a dynamic of unity, community, togetherness, where I'm mindful of your weaknesses and your strengths. So I will be a proponent of you when I think it's best for the community, and I will take you aside and tell you this is not your moment when it's not, and vice versa. And that's a sense that you get from the idea of knowing people as individuals. I don't think anyone would say that someone like a Hitler or a Stalin or a Napoleon, that their greatness was in deeply understanding the people around them and interacting with them in a very individualized way. I don't think anyone would describe that. They would say that there's an evil genius in finding out what base instinct I can tap into that's much more easily shared by millions of people, and then I can get you to throw yourself at the ramparts, under some false notion, and I can promise future glory for all of us. So this is the antithesis of that. I think this, to me, is a very, very important idea. It's an important idea for us as parents. We're going to have to deal with our children as individuals. If we're going to have to deal with our community, feeling as though, why is this other person such a jerk a good part of the time? Because this person is remarkably different than you are or I am. And therefore, it's inconvenient to have people that are remarkably different. I mean, these are some of the things that we, the United States of America, are grappling with right now, like under the guise of equity or whatever you want to call it, that, which is really remarkable, because that's what, when I was a kid, the promise of communism was, a chicken in every pot, and everybody would have a winter coat, and everybody would have these things, and everybody would have the same. And I remember even reading that the leader of the Soviet Union said, I won't own a second coat until every single person has their first coat. That's equity. You know what I mean? That is equity. But of course, it never happened, and it never, and it was a way of manipulating the population. So we're seeing something different than that. I just want to make that. The point I make here is Aaron, your brother, was gathered in. According to the commentaries, and it's here in the bottom of the art scroll, Aaron died in a remarkable way, and Moshe was present when Aaron died. Says that if you go back to that section of the Torah, Aaron and Elazar, Aaron's son, gathered with God, and they took off Aaron's priestly garments and put them on his son Elazar, and then Aaron passed away with a kiss. That's the way the rabbis describe him. So you see, what sounds like a very harsh statement, you shall see it and you shall be gathered unto your people, you too, as Aaron, your brother, was gathered in. God is not punching Moshe in the stomach. God is saying, you saw the dignity and the love and the sensitivity that was involved in your brother Aaron leaving the world. And you can be sure that in recognition for the immense service to humanity that you have done, you too will pass away in that way. You see, so just looking at that changes the flavor and the sense of this, combination with the idea that Moshe was incessantly praying, and the idea that God's making a lofty, sensitive, touching reassurance to Moshe here. No, you will not go into the land, but you will pass away in the manner that your brother did. Let's look at source number 3, which is to look at Numbers 27, and I want to compare the words in sentence 18 and 23. And I just want to make a point here. In sentence 18, what does God say to Moshe? Take for yourself Yoshua bin Nun, a man in whom there is spirit, and lean your hand upon him. Yodcha in Hebrew. Turn over to sentence 23. Moshe did as Hashem had commanded him. He took Yoshua and stood before Elazar, the Kohen, and before the entire assembly. He leaned his hands, Yodov, in the plural. See, so there's something very sensitive going on here, that I hear a certain poetry from the text. In other words, and maybe this is a fanciful notion on my part, but my thought is as follows, that God in a very subtle way is saying to Moshe, of course, Yoshua is not your replacement. He's going to carry on the leadership of the Jewish people. And as we mentioned before, he's going to have access to the Urim V'Tumim. There's going to be a Kohen Gadol to stand alongside of him, not the brother Aaron who stood beside you for these 40 years, but Aaron's son is going to stand beside your successor as well. So in deference to the notion that it's not Tweedledee and Tweedledum here, and just that, you're out and he's in, and we're going to call the same playbook and we're going to expect the same results, and everything is just going to carry on as though Yoshua morphed into Moshe. So that's the sense of place your hand upon him. He's not there to be the next you, but he does need you to transfer to him your authority, your to vest within him the leadership of the Jewish people, and to demonstrate in front of all the people the fact that he has absorbed from you Torah and all the ideas of Sinai. You hear that? That's the idea of Yodcha. Moshe turns around, and what Moshe says remarkably is, no, I understand he's not a clone of me, Yehoshua, and I understand it's not that if I stood a certain way, he's going to stand a certain way, and he's going to use the same desk that I used, and all this simple trappings of leadership. But I want to give over to Yehoshua everything I possibly can give to him, and invest it within him so that his future leadership should be as successful as possible. So again, do you see how this changes the dynamic that's going on here between God and Moshe? It would be, in my view, utterly ridiculous to take this section and pay attention to the nuances and say, wow, look at the manner in which Moshe was dismissed as the leader of the Jewish people. And then, there is a backstory here too, which the Medrash says, he basically, Moshe was saying, well, if Elazar, the son of Aaron, is now the Kohen, maybe my son or one of my sons should take over from me. And that was on Moshe's mind, which everybody poo-poos, but I would suggest that there's a good probability that Moshe's sons were truly great people, even though they don't occupy any special place in the tradition. But, Moshe wasn't a fool. Moshe could have said, well, it would appear to me as a loving father that the best choice you could make would be my own son, one of my sons, I don't know, but God is redirecting him. So he says, okay, so let me have my input in sentence 15. I'll refer to God as the spirit of all flesh, because in my Moshe's view, the essential feature of leadership is going to be to bring out the best from within every single person, and not be the Führer who can impassion the nation and have them run behind me wherever I will take them. And hence the nuance of words, who can bring the people in, who can take them out, that who can guide the people in a manner that is worthwhile, that is uplifting, that creates lasting good in the world. And that's Moshe's definition of leadership. And then God says, you've got your man here, Yehoshua bin Nun. He's your person. Now, he's not you, so place your hand upon him. This, by the way, when somebody gets smicha, that's where the word comes from, to be somech means to rely on also, but you place a hand upon the person. So Moshe is all in because of his deep concern that the maximum be given over for the future, so that the future course of the Jewish people without him will be as sublime, as uplifting, as world changing as has been his leadership until now. And that's what's going on here. That's the nuance here. And this brings us to source number 4, which is a really surprising interchange from the Talmud. And here I'm just relying on a discussion that I heard from this Rabbi Shlomo Yonason Harris, who's a man I know well and who discussed this several weeks ago. Let's look at this Talmud, it's in Tamura 16a if you want to look it up. It's on the source sheet here. Let's read it together. Immediately prior to leaving this world, and again, that's not this week's Torah reading. Like we said, this is prospective, but this will be at the very end of the Torah, the last moments of Moshe's life. Moshe turned to his student and successor, Yoshua, and said, "Please ask me any matter that you are uncertain about." Yoshua responded, "Did I ever leave your side, even for a moment, and go to another place? Have you not written down in the Torah itself that I, Yoshua ben Nun, remained in your tent constantly?" In other words, Yoshua reflects back to Moshe as often is the case, I'm ready for this. Bring it on. At this very moment. Upon hearing this response, Moshe's strength weakened and departed from him. As a consequence, Yeshua forgot 300 statements of halacha that were taught to him, and he became uncertain about 700 other matters. This is a breathtaking section from the Talmud. It really, really is. And I dare say this happens every day of the week, word for word, notion for notion, what the Talmud is talking about. What happens every day is you have a really responsible leader, and he really is genuinely and deeply concerned about the future. And he invests heavily in his successor to train him, to inspire him, to see to it that he or she would be fully ready to take on all the reins of leadership. But somehow the original leader sees that there's a lot that this person doesn't know and doesn't understand. And of course, we've all been in that position, when somebody teaches us to do something, somebody comes in and says, "Oh, let me show you how to set up the Zoom for the class." "Oh, you got it? Yeah, I got it. Oh, that's fine. It's going to work great." Then it's 7:00 and you're fumbling around with your computer and you're saying, "Well, what is, I thought I understood the idea. I thought I pushed this and I do this." And then the Zoom starts up and, I thought this is just going to work like a T, and for some reason it's not working, and then you realize, well, maybe I could have paid a little bit more attention. So in a very touching way, this is what the Talmud is recording, that Moshe himself looked at his student Yoshua, said, "Okay, this is it, ask me what you need." Now, it's unlikely that anybody thought he would say, "Okay, I have my list of 300 things I don't know, and I have this list of 700 things I need a little clarification on, so let's just take a minute and let's just go through these numbers real fast." I don't think that's the import of the Talmud at all, but I think it's talking about an attitude and a sense and a connection. In other words, and it's suggesting to us that when these moments arrive in our lives, no matter which side of the table we're on, we should have a certain sense of humility and a certain sense like, look, there's just too much remaining for me to learn. Obviously, I'll do my best. Obviously, I'll draw upon all the wisdom that you gave me. And obviously, I'll probably do a lot of things very differently than you would do them, for better, perhaps, and for worse. And that's what a transition means. And you see, this statement in the Talmud is so inspiring. And on some certain level, Yehoshua was guilty of feeling too ready to step into the shoes of leadership. And it was that attitude of Yehoshua's which resulted in 1,000 points of light diminishing from the galaxy of the Torah. And that's where this is such a profound thought to add, I think, to this understanding of succession. So I want to try to pull it together a little bit, something I'm always guilty of not doing a good job of. So I just tried to write out 4 points at the end, and I'm not sure these are the 4 points we covered, but let's read them together and
Can I
see.
just ask
Please,
first, why
sure.
did Moses' strength weaken depart from that? And I understood this part about Yehoshua. I think the Talmud says what he should have done is say, "You are my teacher, my master. You know best what you should be telling me."
That's an interesting way of looking at it. Okay, I didn't really think of it that way, but that's great.
But why did Moses' strength?
Because Moshe, because of his devotion to having the best possible future for the Jewish people, understood that Yeshua feeling the way he feels right now is not the best way for him to feel to carry forward as much of Moshe's greatness as possible. You know,
And that
and weakened.
undermined
It didn't
Moses's
completely,
spirit.
his strength weakened. He didn't, Moshe understood that there's going to be a fumble here in the handoff of leadership. And that's where Moshe, who was so devoted to making sure that didn't happen, felt that sense of loss. That's the way I understand it.
See, when I read it, it seemed to me that he was now comforted that there was someone that could continue his influence, and he was relieved.
Right.
And that was what.
Well, also, what we have to understand here is that God has a role here.
Yeah.
So in a way, look, I don't know, it provokes in me a lot of different thoughts, but when someone passes away, we say Hatsur Tamim Polo, that God's work is perfect. Strange sentence from the end of the Torah. We say it at funerals. We say it other times too, but we say it then. So what are we saying? We're saying that death is a direct act of God, and that no possible consideration was not considered by God within that decision. That's what it means. That sword tamim polo, it's perfect. It's not like God forgot, your third cousin in Israel who you send $50 to each month and who needs that to stay in school. Oh, I messed up. I took this guy, left the world. Hey, what am I going to do about that cousin? We'll have to come up with plan B. That's not the way it happens with God. With God, and it really could be when a person musters the strength, and it's meant to be a source of nechama, a source of relief to all people, to the person passing away and to the person who's remaining. Because it's meant to say, as much as I feel pain right now, I fully understand that God considered everything, including my pain, including my loss, and still took this action because this is what is best called for, whatever words you want to put in there. And in that sense, when we say it at a funeral, we don't say it with harshness. We don't say, the king is dead, long live the king. It always struck me as such a strange thing for people to say. But we say this is the very moment that God ordained for this transference to take place. in a complete sense. So God's involved here too. So Moshe is not in panic mode, but Moshe is weakened because Moshe understands had Yoshua mustered a different attitude. And if maybe he just needed to think, oh Moshe, another minute of your life will enrich the future of the Jewish people. And if only it would be so. So let's look at these 4 points. We'll wrap it up. Qualities of a leader determine the quality of leadership and not necessarily the magnitude of leadership. So that's a thought here. Magnitude of leadership, the world seems to hold a special place for leaders of magnitude. I'll just tell you what always struck me, when Sadat came to Jerusalem and ready to make peace with Israel, which was such an unbelievable moment in history. And then some reporter from Time magazine asked him, who do you admire the most? And he answered without missing a beat, Adolf Hitler. It was quite a moment. Quite a moment. Like the Israeli guards should have shot him on the tarmac there. But that wasn't the idea. The idea was, wow, he was a leader. He got millions of Germans to line up behind him and follow him wherever he told them to go. So in Sadat's mind, that was a leader. That's magnitude of leadership. That's not quality of leadership. And I think that's what Moshe addresses here. And I think that's what we need to think about. And I think we need to think about that whenever we're in authority, whenever we're the leaders, whenever we're talking to our own children. We need to give that consideration. There are shortcuts of power which undermine a person's long-term impact. Number 2, what was Moshe yearning for and praying to continue? We discussed this a little bit, but in totality here, I think you have to say he was praying for the best for the Jewish people, which he really unstintingly had devoted his life for. He wasn't hung up with the idea, who's this kid Yoshua going to take my place? Who's God kidding? He wasn't hung up with the idea that it should be 1,000-year leadership and God should miraculously let me live another 120 years. He was really, really praying for the best for the Jewish people. Number 3, how sincerely interested is the present leader to the future. So you see from here, from all sides, from God's side, from Moshe's side, from Yoshua's side, the issue here is carrying forward with the most strength possible. And then an essential concept, number 4, and this really does tie it together. And that's this concept of the decline of the generations and the reverence for previous generations. Otherwise, Torah does not survive. This is where, when we open up the 13 principles of faith of Maimonides, what do we see there? We assert that the Torah that Moshe presented to us is true. We eliminate the challenge of Korach. We eliminate the many, many ideas in Torah that seem strange for us and seem wrong, that are dealing with God. But even on rabbinic levels, we deal with this idea. In other words, we deal with the idea that I didn't understand everything about my teacher. And not everything about my teacher made so much sense to me. But isn't that a little bit the way Yeshua was feeling when at that last moment Moshe turns to him and says, what's your last question? I don't have a last question. That's what we're looking to avoid. It doesn't mean that the next leader is hamstrung and has to just pretend to be a clone or a robot or have to just follow a script that's written to him by the previous person. It does not mean that. But it does mean a sense of reverence, a sense of generations, especially in Jewish tradition. Moshe stood at Sinai and he received the Torah. That's what we say in the beginning of Pirkei Avot. Not just physically, but spiritually, it's all downhill from that point on. And that's not depressing, because it means that to the extent that I can look to the Torah and I can sincerely explore it and try to understand it, then it'll enrich my life because I'm drinking from the wisdom that was accumulated in a much earlier time. Yeah, and that's why I was reading a biography about a man, Hasidic man, and he was celebrating the fact that he had finished going through the Talmud for the 10th time. And then he started again. The person said, well, what are you looking for? So he said, I'm looking for the truth. And that's a big thing to say. Nerds, and looking for the truth, we all know the Greeks, everybody has this tradition of taking out the lamp and looking for the truth. Where do I look? It's like taking the candle on the Erev Pesach and looking for chametz. But the problem is that's what we usually do. We're looking for chametz when we should sit down and we should really look for the truth within the greatness of the Torah that was presented to the Jewish people at Sinai, that Moshe taught with all his heart and with all his soul, and that we need to continue teaching to the best of our ability from one generation to the next. And that's what succession really is all about. Any questions?
Beautiful.
Okay.
The concept of the decline of the generations.
Yes.
What is that?
So it really is a Jewish idea. Well, I'll just tell you, like, philosophically, we're married to what's called the notion of progress, which is, and we know today that every 18-year-old feels they know better how the world should be run than the 25-year-olds who feel they know better how the world should be run than the 40-year-olds, right? So that's the notion of progress, and scientifically that's true. In other words, if I perfected a way to do a heart transplant, so that people can learn from that and perfect that, and they can have a better way of transplanting a heart. That's true. That's progress, and there is such a thing as progress. But the ultimate notion of progress versus tradition is that everybody before me was an idiot. And I'm here to prove that. And we have that attitude running wild today. Absolutely running wild. All righty, till next week. Everybody should be well.
Thank you.
Thank you.